Rush Duels eliminates the once per turn normal summon restriction on monsters, which sort of puts them on the same level as spell and trap cards. In the Master Duel format, there are no restrictions on setting or activating spells and traps, and this mostly continues on into the Rush Duels format. I would like to point out that the supermajority of currently revealed spell and trap support has a requirement or condition which must be met prior to activation. This effectively streamlines the game from a mechanical perspective, but before that, let's jump right into card discussions. First up is 1-Up, which is a very narrow revival card. The requirement is one or more of your monsters being destroyed by an opponent's card, either through battle or card effect. The effect is then to special summon one level 1 normal monster from your graveyard. This might seem like a small thing to pick up on, but the separation of rules text into requirement and effect actually simplifies the game in a major way. Some cards in the past have been confusing as far as which portion of the text functions as the cost, or if the effects resolve simultaneously. Take Graceful Charity for example. The card reads, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards. Drawing 3 cards is the cost of activating Graceful Charity. So if the effect were negated, you would draw 3 cards, and then the effect to discard 2 cards would not resolve. That is a little counterintuitive, but the separation of requirement and effect text is definitely a better solution than the many iterations of problem-solving text some cards receive. But how does the actual effect stack up? Well, 1-Up is underwhelming, just like its pool of targets. Palm-Sized Dragon, and Stray Familiar are another set of parallel monsters like Dragonlight and Dark Sorcerer, but both compare poorly to Vanilla, which I think is funny. This card seems underpowered compared to Duel Monsters cards like Call of the Haunted, and is even pale in comparison to Graceful Revival, to be honest, as it is both more restrictive and with a shallower pool of targets. Continuing on the theme of your monsters being destroyed, we have Counteroffensive Dragon Strike. Requirement: when a dragon-type monster you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's attacking monster, send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. Effect: destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. I want to point out the more modern design of 1-Up by comparison, as it can activate based on destruction by battle or by card effect. But flavorfully, it makes sense that a counterattack only triggers based on your opponent attacking your monster. The condition is a bit narrow and requires a discard, but otherwise reminds me of Michizure. Card advantage is not so important in this format, and it seems to be alright removal otherwise. The specification of dragon-type monster fits the theme of parallel cards well though, as we have a similar trap card for spellcasters. Curtain of Sparks has the requirement when an opponent's monster declares an attack while you have a spellcaster-type monster in the graveyard. Then the effect, the attacking monster loses 500 attack points until the end of the turn. As far as damage reduction, this is worse than Karibo on a direct attack, but it might be okay as an ambush tactic. This is pretty situational, but I have seen Forbidden Lance be used to win a battle, although the much older card Rush Recklessly has more utility by comparison. Speaking of older cards, we have a reprint, Gust. This card has the benefits of more modern text, but is nearly identical to its Master Duel counterpart. Requirement: when 1 or more of your spell cards are destroyed by an opponent's card effect, then the effect, destroy 1 spell or trap. This is not Mystical Space Typhoon, but it might be a little bit better than the other spell and trap removal revealed so far. On the spellcaster side, we have Magical Stream, while the dragons get Fire Dragon's Heat Flash. They have the similar requirement if you control a face-up monster, spellcaster and dragon respectively. The effect is to destroy 1 spell or trap your opponent controls. In the case of Fire Dragon's Heat Flash, it reminds me of Stamping Destruction, but a little worse since it lacks the burn damage. In contrast, Here is the first spell which I think is too strong for the Master Duel format. Recovery Force. As a requirement, shuffle 3 spellcaster-type monsters from your graveyard into your deck. Then, the effect, draw 1 card. This card points out the lower value of draw power in Rush Duels, as compared to the main game. Since, in the main game, this card would definitely see play. Pot of Dichotomy saw experimentation, and that card forfeits the battle phase for 1 more draw. This cantrip reads better than you think, because I want to point out that setting a spell card results in 1 fewer card in hand, so it effectively acts as a cantrip next draw phase. The true benefit of this card might be recursion, maybe as an anti-deck out tech card. Interesting to think about though. By comparison, the next 2 cards are pretty lackluster. One side flip has the requirement if your opponent controls 2 or more face-down monsters. Then the effect, change 1 face-down monster to face-up attack position. This card is just worse than Stop Defense. The other anti-defense tech is Piercing. This is the first card today that does not have a requirement, but arguably should have one. Effect, 1 monster you control gains piercing damage this turn. I think that the requirement should have been to target one of your monsters, but it is fine the way it is. This is a 1-turn Fairy Meteor Crush, so not the best. But I really should point out that card advantage is not the be-all end-all. It is going to take a little lateral thinking to adjust to that. But maybe now we can play those interesting cards that in the main game would forfeit too much card advantage. For instance, my personal favorite, DNA Surgery. On the same note as Piercing, Wind Spirit's Blessing imitates an equip spell, this time Axe of Despair. Requirement, send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. Then, effect, 1 face-up spellcaster-type monster you control gains 1,000 attack points until the end of your turn. Keep in mind, every spell card so far is a normal spell, so spell speed 1. This means no damage step shenanigans. I imagine there will be merit in battle-based removal, or in pushing damage in general. So this card is probably fairly decent. I saved the best for last. Draconic Pressure is very interesting, with the most difficult requirement so far. Send 3 dragon-type monsters from your hand to the graveyard. Then, the effect, destroy all monsters on the field. If a monster is destroyed by this effect, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower dragon-type monster from your graveyard in face-up defense position. This is the wild card of the bunch, as it is very costly to activate. You go -3 to wipe the board and resummon a monster. Also, you need to send very specific monsters from hand to graveyard, meaning the card only fits into a deck with a lot of dragons, so definitely a Kaiba card. As far as power levels though, I think it is playable and even very good to punish overextension. Sort of like a Dark Hole Rope of Life hybrid. This card can probably get you back into the game, but be careful of your opponent's next turn since they can swarm the board after drawing a new hand. The interesting part of Rush Duels so far is how many of the spell and traps seem like weaker versions of Duel Monsters era cards, and I actually think that this is a benefit. Duel Monsters had a huge design problem, where the spells and traps were ridiculously powerful, while the monsters were anemic. We had Raigeki and Pot of Greed, but the strongest monsters were Neo the Magic Swordsman and Beautiful Head Huntress. Funnily enough, both of those monsters are stronger than Dark Sorcerer and Dragolite. Rush Duels definitely seem like a power and complexity reset for the game, and it is going to be interesting to see how the meta shakes out.